The BRICS nations are predicted to take over the world and demolish the US dollar, as you may have heard in the news. That the dollar's demise is imminent and that American hegemony is set to expire. Indeed, a lot of these points are well-founded. The BRICS nations control nearly all of the world's natural resources, are home to a sizable share of the global population, and have constantly expanding economies. In the past half year, you might have noticed a significant increase in the value of Latin American currencies relative to the US dollar. The peso in Mexico, for instance. A dollar cost about 19 pesos at the beginning of 2023, but now a dollar is equivalent to about 17 pesos. The same can be said of Colombia. $1 was equivalent to almost 5,000 Colombian pesos, while today $1 is equivalent to 4,000 pesos. The same pattern is observed in Brazil, Peru, and other Latin American nations. Indeed, it is accurate to say that the US is experiencing challenging times. They have an astronomical debt, which is only growing steadily. They have a ridiculous government deficit that is completely unsustainable. To exacerbate matters, the United States and Europe appear to be the most negatively impacted countries by the purported sanctions against Russia. Thus, the crucial query at hand is what will become of the US currency. In other words, will it really lose its hegemony as many claim? To find out what the future holds for the dollar, we will address each of these concerns in this video and do so using both a short and long-term analysis. Let's begin by analyzing the performance of the dollar in relation to other global currencies. In this chart you will see the famous dollar index, or DXY. The dollar index is an index that measures how strong or weak the dollar is versus other currencies in the world. As you will see, in the last year, the dollar index went from around 114 to 104 at this moment. That means that, on average, the dollar has lost about 10% relative to all other currencies in the world. But if we go even further back in time, here you will see in the last 5 years its movements. You'll see that when the pandemic hit, the dollar dropped from 100 to around 90. But as you'll see here, around September 2021, the dollar started to rise and it peaked at 114, a rise of about 25%. Today it's down from those record levels and it's around 104. The crucial question at hand, though, is what led to the dollar's value plummeting during the pandemic and then surging? Before we respond to that question, let me tell you a few things. Unbelievably, the American government printed more money than it had ever done during the pandemic. One new dollar is thought to have been created for every two that were already in circulation. During the epidemic years, this absurd printing was done to boost the economy. It would seem to anyone that the dollar would collapse as a result of all this money production. Well, no, it did not collapse as I showed you in the previous graphs. During this same time, after the pandemic, the US government debt skyrocketed to the record levels we see today. This debt was as a result of the US government's great deficit. In other words, government spending exceeds revenue collection. And they incur debt to make up that shortfall. Lastly, unprecedented inflation hit the US economy, exacerbating the situation. That's right, the price of everything skyrocketed in the US, which normally makes the dollar worth less versus other currencies. Now, the dollar did not depreciate significantly in spite of all of these occurrences. In fact, as I showed you in the chart above, the dollar even started to rise in value. And here again the question, how is all this possible? To answer that question we have to understand one simple fact, and that is that the dollar dominates the world's finances. That's right, the dollar is the most important currency in the world, as you know from my videos. I already explained to you historically how the dollar was the only currency backed by gold, and how that backing later became fiat currency. You also know that the dollar became what we call today the petrodollar, in other words, oil is priced in dollars. If you are enjoying this video and want to be aware of new videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We need to grasp one basic fact in order to respond to that question: the dollar is the dominant currency in the world economy. Yes, as you have seen from my videos, the dollar is the most significant kind of money in the world. I've already given you a historical explanation of how the dollar was the sole money backed by gold and how that backing eventually gave rise to fiat money. As you are also aware, the dollar evolved into what is currently known as the petrodollar, meaning that oil prices are expressed in US dollars. You probably understand how stocks work. These are businesses that issue shares that signify a small portion of the company's ownership. Debts are highly comparable. These bonds are essentially debt instruments. The government or firm that creates bonds is obligated to reimburse you for the principal amount plus interest if you possess one. It transpires that the financial market in the United States is the most significant globally. To give you an idea, when we talk about the stock market in the US stock market, the US dominates almost 60%. The second largest stock market is Europe, with 13%. While all the other big countries, including the BRICS, have less than 10% each. But those are just the stocks. We are also talking about bonds. Here you will see that the US dominates, accounting for half of the bond market. So there is no question that the United States dominates the financial markets. Naturally, if the United States controls the bond and stock markets, what currency do you believe these deals are conducted in? They are obviously done in US money. Additionally, the fact that they are conducted in dollars indicates how highly sought after dollars are. Therefore, it makes no difference whether the US government is running record debt or record deficits as long as the dollar controls the financial markets. What matters is that the US financial system continues to lead the world. But now let's go back to this chart and answer why the dollar rises or falls versus other currencies. As I already explained, here you will see that the dollar lost its value against other currencies during the pandemic and then soared. Here it is obvious that there is not just one explanation for all these movements, but the most important variable is the Federal Reserve. Indeed, the Federal Reserve serves as the country's central bank. This is the most influential bank in the world, and it sets the interest rates on all debts issued in US dollars as well as the amount of money to be printed. Well, when the pandemic came, as I explained to you, the United States printed money like never before and the Federal Reserve lowered the central bank interest rates to 0%. This was done to stimulate the economy so that there would not be a crisis. And that's the reason the dollar devalued during the pandemic. But here, as you know, the dollar started to go up in value. This was because the Federal Reserve did the opposite. They started slowing the economy by raising central bank interest rates, making all debt more expensive. As you can see, the Federal Reserve's choices have a direct impact on the value of the dollar. This brings us to the final segment of the video, which shows what will now happen to the dollar. We can state, however, that the dollar should lose value in relation to other currencies in the near future. Why do I say this? Well, here you will see the central bank interest rates of the Federal Reserve. As I have already shown you, these have risen rapidly to their highest point now, but now the Federal Reserve is not expected to continue to raise the central bank rates unless inflation continues to rise. In addition, a downturn in the economy is predicted, which will prompt the Fed to lower interest rates in the first half of 2024. The dollar should begin to lose value in relation to other currencies at that point. Will there be a sudden depreciation now? No, it will most likely be between 10% and 15% of the current levels. Thus, the dollar will stay constant in the near future and begin to lose value during the next 6 months. What will happen to the dollar over time, though, given that we are now discussing the BRICS and the currency's demise? JP Morgan Bank just published a piece regarding the demise of the dollar. They claim that two things must occur at the same time for China or the BRICS nations to dethrone the US dollar. One is that the US economy gets into such bad shape that foreign investors start to doubt the US, and two is that China, or the currency of the BRICS, becomes a reliable substitute for the US dollar. The analysis indicates that there is almost no probability that this will occur in the upcoming years. Though not soon, it's possible that this will happen in the ensuing few decades. This brings me to my next question. What are your predictions for the short and long-term future of the dollar? Tell us what you think in the comments section.